Hi everybody, I am a lot of things. I am the technical manager for DFFE. I sit on the SADC pesticide HHP committee. I sit on international committees for pesticides. I'm a pesticide risk manager. So I'm a pretty much a do-everything kind of person. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about herbicides, government and people, and how do we make it all work. Skip, wait. Slide chapter. Okay, so to start off, what we have to start right at the beginning. So before we do or apply any pesticide, I'm talking pesticides today because DFFE doesn't just kill plants or eradicate plants, we eradicate animals, microbes, toads, etc. So it's not just plants. So I'm talking in the context of everything, not just plants. So before we eradicate anything, we have to comply to international legislation because the department is the national designated authority to 2 conventions. And does anybody in the room know what those 2 conventions are? I'll get back to that now. So we are the national designated authority to the Rotterdam Convention as well as the Stockholm Convention. Okay, so that's 2. And then the other convention we still also need to comply to is the Basel Convention as well as the Bamako Convention and the Montreal Convention. So there's a whole bunch of international conventions we need to comply to. And we also need to comply to the global harmonization system of classification and labeling of chemicals. So that comes to the hazard criterion of the different pesticides and their labels, as well as our newly formulated hazardous chemical agents regulations, which were promulgated in March last year, 2021, which then makes the GHS regulations or GHS regulations localized or nationalized in South Africa. So now all our pesticide labels in South Africa as of October this year need to comply to the HCA regulations. So those labels now need to say all the hazard criterion of that pesticide. So if that pesticide is a hazard criterion 2, so whether it is toxic to mammals and birds, it needs to stipulate that on the label. If it's a hazard criterion 5, which is reproductive tox, it needs to stipulate that on the label. If it is a hazard criterion 7, which is acutely toxic to aquatic organisms, it needs to stipulate that on the label. So this is very exciting for anybody who needs to know what sort of environmental toxicities pesticides hold, as well as human tox, whether it's acute toxicities or chronic toxicities. And then also you need to know what biomonitoring protocols need to be implemented. And if you don't know what biomonitoring protocols are, those are the human health protocols that need to be implemented when you are applying a pesticide. So if the pesticide has any sort of human health impacts, so if it's an organophosphate, for instance, and it's impacting on the acetylcholinesterase in the body, you need to actually do or take blood samples. If it is an acute toxicity pesticide, a urine sample is necessary based on the frequency and duration of the pesticide usage. If it is a chronic pesticide, a blood sample would need to be taken depending on the frequency and duration of the usage of that pesticide. And then obviously the PPE policy, what PPE are you using? Hopefully not dust mask. Because cotton has a 5 times absorption rate for pesticides with inhalation risk. So I hope nobody's still applying pesticides using a dust mask. I have a little bit of shock from all of you here. You should be using, if the pesticide has an inhalation risk, you should be using a half-face respirator. If that inhalation risk is a hazard criterion 4, 5, or 6, which is chronic tox pesticides, you should be using a full-face respirator. And our PPE policy was adapted to ensure it's in line with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization PPE policy that was published in 2020. Okay, so the international legislation, as I've said, is the Rotterdam Convention, Annexure 3, the prior informed consent, which helps countries make informed decisions regarding the import of banned and restricted pesticides. I'm sure you all know about the UPL disaster in Durban a couple of months ago, and there were plenty of Ppe Pesticides in that Cornubia warehouse that were not on the Ppe register for the prior informed consent. So there were some, like the methimidofos, and I think the other one, methimidofos, the other one was methan, that was not actually on the Ppe register with the department, but was housed in that Cornubia warehouse. And then the Stockholm Convention, which is the pesticides of the persistent organic pollutants, which eliminate and restrict the use of the manufacturing of the POPs. A well-known POP to everybody, which you all should know, is DDT. DDT is used for the spraying of mosquitoes with indoor residual spraying, IRS, and it's sprayed for mosquitoes, for malaria control. It is a POP. South Africa does still use malaria, but only the Department of Health in Limpopo and up north KZN. So you can't go into any shop and buy DDT. So it is a POP, it is still used in South Africa, but only by the Department of Health, which is very interesting because there is a Bio Pesticide that is available for the use of spraying for mosquitoes, for malaria. So the interesting question would be, why are we still using a POP in South Africa when there is a biopesticide that is available for the spraying of mosquitoes for malaria? The other one that we have to conform to is the Basel Convention, which covers the control of the transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal, which includes empty containers. And this is all those nice empty containers that you don't triple rinse or puncture, you just throw them in your backyard. And that is also considered under Act 36 as hazardous waste. But under the National Environmental Management Waste Act, if you are triple rinsing and puncturing them according to a proper waste control plan, it is not considered hazardous waste under NEMWA, National Environmental Management Waste Act, if you are following the proper disposal procedures for those empty containers. Which is interesting because we have now two pieces of legislation in South Africa which considers empty containers in two separate ways. Interesting. And then we have the Bamako Convention, which controls the import of hazardous waste into Africa and the control of transboundary movements and management of hazardous waste. It also covers the dumping and stockpiling of near obsolete pesticides on the African continent. So it tries to control pesticide companies dumping near obsolete pesticides on the African continent. Okay, so what you see in front of you is the World Health Organization. Where's the pointer? Oops. Oops. Okay, I don't know what I just did. Sorry guys. Assistance please, for obviously the person who doesn't know how to use this.
I'm surprised you were able to find that, to do that. It's
Oh.
very impressive.
How's that little one? Okay.
We're back.
My bad, that little one. Sorry, I'm a bit blind, I'm not wearing my glasses. Okay, so There we go. Okay, so how the pesticides were classified in the past was with the World Health Organization 5 classes, where 1A was considered extremely hazardous and U was unlikely to present an acute hazard. Now, the WHO, these were with labels, color-coded bars on the pesticides. Now, in not South Africa, on the African continent, 0.25% of the population is green-yellow colorblind. So what happens when you have an illiterate population which is green-yellow colorblind? You have people using an extremely hazardous pesticide thinking it is unlikely to present acute hazard pesticide because they can't read the label and they're also green-yellow or green-red colorblind. So they're swapping the it's not so dangerous pesticide with it is an acutely hazardous pesticide. So the WHO classes were substituted now with the GHS classes, which are the ones here at the bottom. The globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. This one looks at, it also has 5 categories as you can see, but it looks at oral and dermal, because it doesn't just look at whether it's extremely hazardous, highly hazardous, moderately hazardous. It looks at, excuse me, the oral and the dermal, and there's a hazard statement on the label as well. So it will have on the label fatal in contact with skin, fatal in contact, toxic, harmful, maybe harmful. So, and this is what's different between the WHO classes and the new GHS categories, is there is a hazard statement, a hazard pictogram, and a hazard class on the new label, which is different to the WHO classes, which just gave you the hazard class and the color coding on the label. Okay, this is an excerpt from the EP, the Environmental Program's new pesticide policy, where we've given the trade name, the chemical family, the active ingredient, the high rate class, and the WHO class. Now, when you look at the WHO classes, it shows you different classes. But what is interesting about this slide? When you're putting together a pesticide policy, because remember, you have to put a pesticide policy together when you are doing your species management plans, or your management plans which you are going to submit to STIA. So part of that management plan is a pesticide policy for your species. If you look here, all of these first 2, 4, 6, 8, all the first 8 species are all in the same high-rec group. What does that mean? It means that if you're using those 8 on the same species, you're going to create resistance. So if you're going to be using Climax, so if the pesticide or the Glyphosate or the pesticide supplier says to you, use Climax on this species, it works well. And you keep using Climax, you keep using Climax, you keep using Climax, automatically now ding, ding, ding in your head, you should not use the same pesticide or herbicide in this case, because Climax is the herbicide, on the same species. Why? Because you are using the same herbicide, so there's a risk that you're going to create a resistance of that herbicide or that species to that herbicide. Now you go back to the Glyphosate or the pesticide supplier and you say to him, Mr. Pesticide Supplier, my Climax is not working anymore. Has anybody experienced that? You apply a herbicide and now your kill rate is no longer 80% on that species. It's now 60%, ne? It's now 60%. You go back to the Glyphosate or the pesticide supplier and you say, my Climax is not working anymore. And he says to you, oh, don't worry, use Hatchet. Hatchet will work. And you say, oh, okay, cool, I'm going to take the Hatchet. You take the Hatchet. Okay, it's fine because your Climax was a methylfuran methyl, né? Your Hatchet is an Invasive. So you look at the label and you say, okay, well, this was a methylfuran methyl or a mets, and Hatchet is a Invasive. It's different, so it's fine. You don't bother to look at the high-rec group. So you go happily and you start spraying your Hatchet on that same species. 6 months down the line, a year down the line, your Hatchet's no longer working. Go back to the Glyphosate, the pesticide supplier. Mr. Pesticide supplier, our Hatchet's no longer working. But it took a shorter period of time not to work than the previous Climax. He says, oh, don't worry. I'll give you Extreme. Okay, I'll take it, because now it's a different active ingredient again. Now it's clonomurin ethyl. Now it's 2 months, and now it's not working at all. Now, all of these will not work against that species, because you've now created resistance for all the high-rec group Bs for that species. So what is the lesson here? Don't just look at the chemical family or the active ingredient when you're trying to swap which herbicide you're going to use next. Look at the high-rec group, because you might just be using the same herbicide in the same high-rec group and you're creating resistance faster. And then what? Because then, if you've created resistance in group B, what now? Act 36, everybody's favorite act, ne? Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act. This is the act that governs everything, from everything, even Bio Pesticides, ne? It governs the registrations of the fertilizers and the pesticides under Section 3. It governs the registrations of pest control operators, the lady who was asking about the PCOs, okay? So under Section 11, which basically states you cannot apply a pesticide for financial gain, and the new part of the regulation is or other. So even now, if you're not applying pesticides for financial gain anymore, but you're applying a pesticide, you have to be registered. So whether you're applying a pesticide and getting paid for it, or whether you're applying a pesticide to kill a plant or kill an animal, you have to have a PCO. Okay? So you have to do a pest control operator's course. You have to apply for a P number through Act 36, and then once you have your P number, you are now legally compliant to Act 36, and you can go ahead and apply your pesticides. Act 36 regulates, prohibits importation, sale, acquisition, disposal of use under those sections, 15.7 and 4 respectively. The registrar can cancel a registration under Section 4. He can. Never seen him do it, but he can. And under certain conditions can make unscheduled visits. So he can come out to your farm, your site, your project, etc. under Section 15 and say to you, well, uncle, what is that herbicide and what are you applying it on? And at what concentration? At what dosage? Are you compliant to the label? He can do that. He can demand the paperwork for the herbicides in your possession. So he can say, are you legally allowed to have those pesticides? Are they all registered? Are you applying them correctly? He can grant import permits under Section 16, whether they are for research purposes, emergency registrations, etc. And the appeals, whether he's appealing or you're appealing, falls under Section 6. Okay, there was a pesticide management policy that was promulgated in 2010, Notice 1120, which was supposed to improve legislative framework. This was under Act 36. Encourage development and use of alternative products and techniques, and integrate relevant international agreements and initiatives, and increase transparency, access to information, and public participation. This didn't go anywhere. So last year, Act 36 was amended. It was open for discussion, and it closed in August last year. It has yet to be promulgated and gazetted, the amendments to Act 36. So we're all waiting with bated breath to see when the amendments get promulgated. When you're doing your pesticide policy, this is probably the most important thing that you need to remember. Pesticides with unmanageable risk are the endocrine disrupting properties chemicals, the EDPs, the persistent organic pollutants, the POPs, the carcinogenic and immunotoxic potential pesticides, the Class 1As, the highly hazardous pesticides, the Class 1Bs, and the pesticides with frequent and severe poisoning incidents, the arsenics and the 2As. There's a popular arsenic that the Eastern Cape love that they use on cacti. Which one is it? MSMA. And what is MSMA? A pesticide with unmanageable risk. Highway. Okay, so NEMA, the National Environmental Management Act, encourages implementation of comprehensive pesticide reduction strategies. So reduce your pesticide usage. Substitution principles, so promote pesticides with lesser toxic ones and non-chemical alternatives. It's not saying get rid of everything. It's saying reduce your pesticide usage and substitute with lesser toxic ones. So it's talking about the hierarchy of control principles and precautionary principles. This is what we did when we rewrote the pesticide policy for the environmental programs. Review existing registrations. So the pesticides that have been on Act 36 since 1947, should those not be reviewed? Question. Waste management, including empty and obsolete chemicals. So where are all these empty containers? What are we doing with them? What's happening to them? What about all these half-used, leaking, obsolete pesticides on farms? Are we just hiding them? Are we burying them? Are we burning them? God help us. What's happening to that? How are we managing that? Where's our container management programs? Where's our waste management programs? And then, interestingly enough, Department of Agriculture is actually responsible for waste container management under Section 4.5 of their own Act 36, which means they're responsible for the Basel Convention regulations. But they outsourced it to CropLife. So CropLife's waste container management schemes that they run is the responsibility of Act 36, which was outsourced by the department to CropLife, South Africa. So our policy was updated in 2012. It was only finalized last year because it takes a long time to turn a Titanic. Okay? It covers all herbicides and pesticides, but certain pesticides and herbicides are not covered up by our policy. The ones with unmanageable risk. An example is arsenics. Pesticides with frequent and severe poisonings like the arsenics, like MSMA. Our policy prefers biopesticides. So remember I said hierarchy of control? Substitute with lesser toxic ones, biopesticides, non-chemical alternatives. Biopesticides are non-chemical alternatives. So we have a priority for biopesticides in our policy. And one example is Cylindrobasidium livei, a wood rotting fungus for black wattle. It's commercially available as stump out. Okay, so you can commercially buy stump out, which is a wood rotting fungus, and use it as a cut stump application instead of confront, for instance, which is by the way carcinogenic and a reproductive toxin. And then we have agreed control measures. If your pesticide has a hazard criterion 4, 5, and 6, and it's a chronic tox with inhalation risks, we don't use it as a foliar application, obviously for obvious reasons. Okay, so our herbicide spreadsheet is a one-stop shop. So it covers all of the pesticides, it gives you all of the ecotox data, the environmental fate data, and we've already done the environmental and social risk assessment for you, and we give you a recommended product. So we list all the products for you, and then we say to you, we know you're all lazy and you're not going to do the environmental and social risk assessment yourselves. So if you are too lazy, but you can just press the scroll button all the way to the end of the spreadsheet, there's the recommended one, which is the safest one that you can use. It covers all the Cara and the Nemba species. So there's 424 species in the spreadsheet. 14 treatment methods, 31 formulations, 53 herbicides, 13 biopesticides, and 3 herbicide categories. What is going ding, ding, ding in your head now? Or what should be going ding, ding, ding in your head now? Are you still all awake? Okay. There's only 3 herbicide categories, people. And I was just talking about herbicide resistance. So there should be more herbicide categories, because if we're only working in 3 herbicide categories, what are we doing? Creating resistance. And hence the reason why there's 13 biopesticides. Because why? We know we're heading down the road of resistance. But those 3 herbicide categories are the safest ones in the 48 herbicide categories available. We don't want to use the others, because the others are worse than the 3 we're currently using. So the only other way we can go is towards biopesticides. Okay, so that's what our spreadsheet looks like. And that's only a third of the spreadsheet. That's just the front piece that could fit on the side, otherwise you wouldn't be able to read it. So basically it gives you the species, then it gives you what herbicides are registered here, gives you how to apply each one of them, and if you keep scrolling this way, here's the recommended product. Okay, I'm going to make you work for it once I give you the spreadsheet. Okay. So what we also have put in the spreadsheet is the safety. So we have biocontrol, we have health and safety officers in field when our teams do work, that they do toolbox talks. But the toolbox talk is not about you have to wear your PPE. Why? Because they just go to, when they get hot, what do they do? The glasses go on the head, the mask goes under the chin. What we say to them is, why do you wear a mask when you do a foliar application? Because there's an inhalation risk. If you inhale it into your lungs, what happens? That's what our toolbox talks are about. Why do you wear goggles? Because that pesticide, like glyphosate for instance, What is the risk of glyphosate? If you have to give someone PPE for glyphosate, what PPE do you give someone for glyphosate? I'm not worried about his mouth. Why? He can wear a dust mask for glyphosate for all I care. Why? Because the risk is his eyes and dermal. There's a dermal risk for glyphosate and eyes. So the biggest risk with glyphosate is dermal absorption and through the eyes. If you are applying Confront, what's the biggest risk with Confront? You guys love Confront here in Eastern Cape. I know you love Confront. I see everybody smiling and nodding. Yeah. By the way, we're going to get to Confront just now. Confront is a reproductive tox. It damages unborn children. So who should not be spraying Confront? Women. But we'll get to that now. Confront is an inhalation risk. So where's the main protection that you should worry about when you are applying Confront? Not dermal. So don't put them in a Darth Vader suit, a full-on Tyvek, chemically resistant overall, because the risk is not through the skin with Confront. The risk is inhalation. So they should be wearing a half-face respirator and proper eyewear. Okay. So PPE is not a one-size-fits-all. The PPE should be according to the pesticide or the chemical class and the toxic risk or the dermal inhalation, whatever, and the application. So if you're going to be doing a foliar or a cut stump, etc. So you can't just give someone a chemical overall and a dust mask and a pair of goggles. No. You have to look at where the contact or the exposure risk is and what how the chemical is going to work through the absorption points. Okay, and then we have a self-assessment and a compliance auditing directorate that comes out and makes sure that we comply to all our own rules and regulations to ensure that we are actually doing what we say we're supposed to do and that we tell everybody else to do. Our challenges is high rates of foliar application. Because people don't foliar apply like this, everybody Mexican waves. Ne? Everybody foliar applies like this. So what we've done is if that herbicide has an inhalation risk, we've taken it off a foliar application because everybody Mexican waves. So that's where your engineering controls comes into your hierarchy of control. For you, where you mitigate your risks. So if you know that the people are going to Mexican wave with a foliar application and you know there's an inhalation risk, unmanageable risk, that is an unmanageable risk. You can't be on site all the time to tell people lower that lance, lower that lance. So then you take off that foliar application risk. It's labor intensive, and that's where we're looking for an alternative. If we can't do the foliar application anymore, what are we going to do instead? How are we going to mitigate that risk? Staff not wearing their PPE correctly, obviously, so that's how we change their toolbox talks to, if you don't wear it properly, this is what will happen. And not you have to wear your PPE, but this is the reason why you have to wear your PPE. Incorrect PPE recommended. So now we have a PPE matrix, which we send out to all our service providers and all our teams and all our regions to say, excuse me, if this is the herbicide that you're using, this is the PPE. If this is the application you're using, this is the PPE. So that we don't have people just buying a box of dust masks. Herbicide companies not disclosing adjuvants in aquatic registered herbicides. My big bugbear. Polyethoxylated toluamine. That carcinogenic and co-formulant adjuvant, whatever you want to call it, that gunk they put into glyphosate formulations that causes cancer. Does your glyphosate have toluamine in? No. So now, before we buy or procure a glyphosate, we request the dossier to confirm, and I'm talking about the Ecotox dossier, or a letter from the manufacturer to confirm that the glyphosate does not contain polyethoxylated toluamine before we put it on our policy. There's 156 glyphosate formulations registered in South Africa. I have only received 3 letters confirming the formulations of polyethoxylated toluamine free. So I only have 3 on my policy out of 156. But what's nice is in October this year, all those glyphosate formulations will have to confirm that they have polyethoxylated toluamine in their formulation, because Section 11 of HC8, the Hazardous Chemical Agents Regulation, stipulates if you have a co-formulant in your formulation that is hazardous, you have to declare it on your label. I'm just waiting for October. So what is the way forward? Measures to mitigate the risk. In other words, if you're going to do the Mexican wave on a foliar application, don't do foliar applications, find another way. Research outcomes for herbicide toxicity exposures implemented, awareness of potential risks of herbicides, and use alternative measures where possible. So we're going biocontrol, we're using brushing, we're using manual removal of aquatic weeds, which I'll do in the presentation I'm doing later. We're using fire regimes. We're doing all sorts of alternative measures to ensure that we can reduce the usage of our herbicides in our programs. And then the hierarchy of control to implement the reductions of pesticides. With the implementation of the new pesticide policy, we've reduced the usage of pesticides in the EP program so far by 43%. And I'm sure as we go, it'll come down more. As we are able to, not force, encourage more biopesticide registrations in South Africa. I am on the Bio Pesticide regulatory technical working group for SADC, and we are trying to get standardized biopesticide regulations for the SADC regions, and hopefully then the registrations for biopesticides in South Africa will also go a bit smoother. ESRAs are important, environmental social risk assessments. Nobody does an ESRA before they go out and spray a plant, do they? No one goes out and says, this is the area I want to spray, let me do a quick ESRA. You don't have to go and appoint a scientist to go do an ESRA for you. You can download a program called Primate, free, off the internet, and do a desktop ESRA in 20 minutes. And it will tell you whether the risk is medium, high, or low, and what for the pesticide you're wanting to use in that area. So ESRAs can be done quickly before you go and spray stuff in the area. And then it'll also tell you whether you're being an idiot and whether you're spraying the right stuff or not. So maybe Primate, P-R-I-M-E-T. Google it. Very good desktop ESRA program to do a quick risk assessment. Biobeds, exclusion zones, buffer zones. Nobody's implementing these, but these are such good mitigation tools for pesticide management. Now I'm going to give you a case study. I hope you're all still awake because you look like you're falling asleep. Okay, so we embarked on an elimination process back in 2010. We looked at our pesticide policy and we said, right, hierarchy of control. The first step is elimination. So we looked at pesticides with unmanageable risk. I gave you those 5 steps. We eliminated 5. Next step is substitution on the HOC. So we said, okay, what can we substitute? So we substituted 6 pesticides back in 2010 with safer ones. We eliminated MSMA and we substituted it with Impala. So we sent letters out to all our suppliers in 2010 and we said we will no longer be procuring MSMA for you. We banned, we as the department, not the country, not Act 36, the department banned MSMA in 2010. Went to the chemical companies and said, find us a safer alternative. They came back 3 years later, 2013, with Impala. So we said, thank you very much. Because we were hitting their pockets because we were not buying MSMA anymore. So we said, find us an alternative. They did, with Impala. Then, in the Northern Cape, their favorite was Garlon and diesel. Garlon is a butoxyethyl ester which volatilizes, so in other words, it goes up in the air, floats around when it's hot, and then when the temperature cools down again, all that butoxyethyl ester just falls out of the air onto whatever. Unfortunately, we had 2 cases of the whatever falling on vineyards. So, no more, thank you, no more gardening for us, thank you very much, especially with foliar operations in the Northern Cape. And the diesel. They love Garlon and diesel applications as basal applications on the Prosopis in the Northern Cape. We also said, right, ban, out with the Garlon and diesel applications. Please find us something safer. Came back with Garlon and diesel, Turbidor. Turbidor, nice substitution for Garlon and diesel. It's also basal application, so we don't have to cut down the Prosopis because the growth, the groeikanal, the growth canal is underneath the ground. So if you do a cut stump on a Prosopis, it coppices from underneath the ground. So all you're doing is you're creating a multi-stemmed plant from a single-stemmed plant. So the best way to control Prosopis is to just do a basal application, kill the thing standing. So we did the same for aerial applications of the Prosopis in the Northern Cape as well, because it's so dense, we can't just keep cutting it down. Our teams couldn't get in, so we needed an aerial application. And what was registered at that stage was Glyphosate as an aerial application with polyfluoxylated teleamine. We said, no thank you, find us something safer. They came back with Sendero. And then also we said we need something as a herbicide assistance tool for arid areas where farmers don't have access to water. So we want a ready to apply something that you can just cut the tree down and paint on the stump. So they came back with Kaput gel. So what I'm trying to say is the industry does work with you if you force them nicely. We didn't force, we went to the industry and we said, please, we need help, we need alternatives. And they work with you, and they come back and they say, okay, we found something. So then we go and we say, okay, let's get an emergency registration, let's get this thing registered because we need this in whichever region or area we need this. And now we're currently working on engineering controls. So the engineering controls we're trying to do is now we're saying we don't want to do foliar applications anymore, especially with the pesticides with inhalation risks, like anything with plenum in it, for instance, or anything with, not plenum, pink liver. So we want something where we can use plenum, but not in the formulations that it currently is. The triclopers are very good, but we don't want a butoxyethyl ester. We don't want the esters because the esters volatilize. So please, can you formulate it in a different formulation, but it's so that it also still works well. So we've gone back to the industry with that, and we've said, help us. We still want a Garlon, the tricloper butoxyethyl ester, but we don't want it as an ester because it volatilizes. Make it formulated in a different way so that it's still effective, but it doesn't have the health risks and the environmental risks it currently has. So we're waiting for the outcomes there. So you have to take steps to mitigate risks and lessen impacts needed to implement the new PPE policy. So we had to bite the bullet and we had to change things. And it is difficult. It's like trying to turn the Titanic with only one oar. There's no engine. There's no outboard motors. It's just one person with an oar trying to turn the Titanic. Yeah? And then the biomonitoring to monitor the human health risks. So we know there's certain pesticides we use that still have human health risks, but none of them are chronic. They're only acute tox. So it's only urine tests that we have to do at this stage. There's no chronic tests, so there's no blood samples we need to take and all that nonsense at this stage. But it has to be in line with the GHS and the HCA regulations, because all of this monitoring data has to be submitted to the Department of Employment and Labour. And then please remember, when you're putting your PPE or your pesticide policy together, PPE is the last step to protect people from risk. Last step. So don't think, okay, I'm putting my pesticide policy together, I'm going to just smack a mask on someone. No. You start with elimination, substitution, engineering, behavioral controls, administrative controls, and then PPE. Last step. And then the biomonitoring is also required for acute and chronic pesticides, if you're using them, which you all are. So there's your hierarchy of controls. Take a picture if you must. But this presentation will be made available to everybody. But so you first remove the hazards. So you eliminate the highly hazardous pesticides. Then you substitute with the safer ones. Then you do engineering controls. So this engineering controls can either be formulation of the pesticides into a safer formulation, or isolate the person from the risk. So instead of using a knapsack sprayer with a lance, where the person sprays in front of him and walks through the pesticide, have a back mounted knapsack where the lance is attached to the knapsack at the back, so that he walks forward and the pesticide sprays behind him. So it's not always just about fixing the pesticide. It can be about fixing how you spray the pesticide. So all these mitigation measures you can think about. So, and you do get those motorized back-mounted knapsack sprayers where he just presses a button and he walks and it sprays behind him. So there's minimal risk or minimal pesticide onto the person. So think about these. Change the way that people work. If it's hot, to minimize how they get affected, like in the Northern Cape, get them to work from 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock, then they go home. Then they come back at 4 o'clock and they work till 8 o'clock. They're still working their 8 hours. They're just not working their 8 hours through the midday sun. So think of different ways where you can still be within the regulations, but just think a bit outside the box. There's the guidelines to use for the personal protection when handling and applying pesticides. This is our handbook when we put together our PPE policy. Okay? You can download it off that website. Okay? So remember, look at the species spreadsheet and choose the species you want to control. That's your first step. Okay? Then you look at the herbicides that are registered for that species. Okay? And you recommend the safest herbicide by ensuring you look at the hazard criteria for each pesticide, the human health and the environmental risks, and ensure you mitigate with the engineering protocols, the behavioral protocols, or the PPE, and then you do a risk assessment. So that is your desktop Ezra. Okay. And all of this I've done already if you're too lazy to do it yourself, if you just scroll all the way to the end of the spreadsheet. So there you go. You're going to do a cut stump on black wattle. There's your pesticides registered for black wattle. Which one do you choose? You're doing a cut stump on black wattle. Remember I said, choose the species you want to choose in your spreadsheet. Choose the method you want to do. Look at the pesticides that are registered. Look at the hazard criterion for each of them. Okay, now, what does your team look like? Have you got women in your team? Yes. You've got women in your team, confront is out. Why? Can't use confront. If there are females in your team, you can't use confront. Why? Development and reproductive tox, damage unborn child. So if it's an EPWP team, which is 60% women, can't use confront. Confront's out. Come, finish. No confront. Okay, now, next thing, do you want your people to live longer than 50? Okay, plenum is out. Oops. Plenum is out, access is out. Why? Endocrine disrupting. Endocrine disrupting. What does the endocrine disrupting do? It changes your endocrine system, which means it's chronic. So you can develop long-term issues. It's an endocrine damage to lung organs, lungs. So you'll probably get lung cancer. You'll probably get lung cancer. Okay. Now, is your black wattle near a river? Your black wattle near a river? Okay. Plenum is out, access is out. Okay, so, yeah? Hazard criterion 7, acute tox to aquatic organisms, acute tox to aquatic organisms. Plenum is out, access is out. See, so now you already, just by looking at this, you now already know where you can and can't use this pesticide, and when and who can and who can't use this pesticide. Okay, now we're looking at PPE. Okay, if you use hatchet, acute tox to mammals and birds. Okay, H317 is skin irritant. H335 is skin sensitizer. H315 is inhalation. Okay, so with hatchet, you're going to have to wear a half-face respirator and a chemically resistant overall or a polyester overall. So if you can't afford the chemically resistant, polyester works all right. No cotton. No cotton. Why? 5 times absorption. Cotton absorbs 5 times quicker than polyester. No cotton. Okay. Problem here is persistent in soil or water. Harmful to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. Oops, not near water. So if it's a hazard criterion 7 or 8, not near water. Okay, so this is out for water, that's out for water, that's out for water, that's out for water, that's out for water. Oops. But has anybody noticed something here? There's no hazard criterions here in stump out. Why? Because it's a biopesticide. Biopesticides do not have any environmental or human health risks. Because this is a naturally occurring wood rotting fungus. So instead of killing people and the environment, why don't we just use a biopesticide? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I think if anybody didn't find that presentation extremely informative, and you know which side of the coin Debbie's rooting for, biocontrol. Definitely. Do we have any questions before we break for lunch? Right over there.
There's farmers with crop management in the Cliff. I'd just like to know where you get your stump out from.
Sorry, where big man?
The stump out, where does one get stump out?
The stump out is available from the ARC in Vredenburg in Stellenbosch. Come talk to me, I'll give you the contact.
Okay, I suppose from my side it's just to add a bit of practicality because I'm trying for 2 years to get stump out. And eventually when we did get it, after phoning them every 18 days for about a 6-month period, we found it works not so well in areas where it was very dry. So we've been struggling a little bit with this, just getting hold of the stump out. I in the end drove all the way to Cape Town to go and get it, and then we brought it back and we did struggle a little bit with it. So it's good, it's definitely worth having in your toolbox, but just from an Eastern Cape point of view, it's been not 100% successful, I would say.
Would that maybe, Debbie, the time of the year application? That would assist?
It could be, well, it is a fungus, so it would depend on the time of the day you apply, as well as the time of the year you apply, and also your carrier. So it would also depend on which oil you used as the carrier. So come talk to me, because generally applying the stump out would be early morning when there's a little bit of dew around is the best time to apply it, or evening when it's getting a bit dewy, but in the middle of the day, no.
There we go. Next. Gentleman here.
Okay, it's Olga speaking. Working for the municipality parks and cemeteries. I've got a few questions. One is chemical versus bio pesticides. Which one is more effective than the other? Two, the future of bio pesticides. How soon do you think it will thrive? Do you think chemical pesticides will ever be discarded anytime soon? Three, the current existing regulations, how well do you think they are protecting the environment at large? Do you think they're enough, or do you still need more?
Okay, biopesticides, is one better than the other, because generally the biopesticide or the biocontrol agent is specific to a plant. So if you're looking at stump out, it's only for black wattle. And it works on black wattle and silver wattle, nothing else. If you're looking at the hack attack, which is Colocatricum, which works on Hackia, is only for Hackia. So it's not one is better than the other. Biopesticides are not, it works on all species. It's specific to one species. Will biopesticides take over chemicals? Never in a million years, or not in the year of purple cats, as my old prophet Varsity used to say. I know Belinda's laughing because she used to hear that. No, never, ever. But there is a place for biopesticides on the market, and there is a place for biopesticides in your toolbox, in your pesticide toolbox. And then legislation, is it precautionary enough? Yes. but everybody has to do their part. So if everybody just does their little part, then the legislation is strong enough, but people have to do their little bit. And I don't see everybody doing their little bit. Let's put it that way. So I think everybody needs to do their little bit, then the legislation is strong enough.
Debbie, could you maybe just expand on the use of biocontrol and herbicides together, as in the Ridderpark Dam, what happened, where you're using a different concentration so that the audience can also hear there are combinations?
Okay, no, that's in my next presentation.
Okay, that's in the, all right, sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
Yeah, no, that's in my next presentation. But there is, what I will say on that is there is a place for biocontrol and pesticides to be used together, but not on top of each other. But also only in certain circumstances. So you need, before you go as a landowner and try and spray and put biocontrol on together, please consult someone who knows before you do that, so that we can tell you whether the two will go together for that species, because there's only certain species where you can integrate chemical and biocontrol. It doesn't work for all species. So please consult before you do that, otherwise all you're going to do is make a mess, to put it nicely.
Sorry, I just want to check with you. Did I hear you correctly when you were saying one can do cut stump treatment and apply the bio pesticide?
Yes.
Okay, which is good, because I believe that they take longer to react than the chemicals. But at least if I will be able to cut down whatever that is standing and apply. Has it been checked or tested? How long does it take, or does it, if you do a cut stump, is there any regrowth after that? If there is, how much can you measure that in terms of sprouting back? Something like that.
Black wattle is a non-sprouting tree, so even if you do a cut stump with a normal chemical, it's not going to sprout. Black wattle is not a sprouting tree, so that stump that you cut is not going to sprout. But if you do a so if you cut it and you apply the stump out, which is the bio pesticide or the biocontrol agent, it takes longer than a pesticide because because it's a wood rotting fungus. So what it does is it actually rots the stump. So it will take longer to kill it.
So
probably about three to 4, maybe 5 months.
Okay.
Depending on where you are. In the Western Cape, because it's vochtig.
More moisture.
It's more moist. It takes about a month to 2 months. But here, it will probably take longer.
Okay. Is there anything for Jackson's, or is it just the black wattle that you have?
Bio pesticide for Port Jackson, no, but there's very, very successful biocontrol agents for Port Jackson. So those big brown gooders, yes, and there's also a flower bud border. There's biocontrol agents for Port Jackson. So I would stick to biocontrol. I wouldn't cut Port Jackson. I'm for biocontrol.
And goats, they work very well.
No, please, no goats. No.
See this question.
No.
Last question from the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Let's say now you are contracted, qualified contractor to deal with these alien invasions in your land. Let's say now the contractor does something bad for the environment. Who gets to account in that situation? Like maybe they use a bad chemical, and then who has to, like, what is the responsibility of the landowner who has contracted someone to manage they are alien plants. And lastly, maybe also like when it comes to disposal now of the alien plants that have been cut and the chemicals that have been used, how can we manage those? Because if you are running the project in your territory, you have to be able to account where did the stuff all goes to.
Okay, well, to start off with, are you a private landowner or are you a municipality? What are you?
Government.
You government?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you gave out herbicides, you would obviously have a issue sheet or something along those lines. Because obviously you gave herbicide out.
Maybe they spray it themselves.
Okay, maybe it's not that. It's a harbor. It's a parastatal.
Okay, because I'm just trying to figure out exactly what your situation is with regards to you've got pesticide left over.
No, we contract. We give out a tender to someone to come and manage all the herbicides in our for compliance purposes.
In the harbour.
Okay, so you've got a subcontractor which is doing the work, and you want to know ultimately who is responsible. If you're subcontracting it, is it still the landowner that is responsible?
Yes.
So yes, it's still the landowner that's responsible to ensure that the contractor is applying it in the correct way.
Yes, so you...
And following the rules.
Yeah, so basically you are ultimately responsible. So if he makes a mess, under the regulations, you're responsible. If there's leftover pesticide and it's not going to be used, it's your responsibility to dispose of that pesticides in a safe way. My suggestion to you would be to contact the pesticide company who manufactured that pesticide and ask them to take back the leftover pesticide. Because otherwise you would have to dispose of, there's no disposal facility in South Africa for bits and pieces of leftover pesticide. You would have to ship it to Wales.
He's talking about these contractors stuffed up.
No, he's also talking about leftover pesticide. Am I right?
No, I do not handle pesticides.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking just about the contractor messed up.
Contractor, how do I get involved if they are not doing their work that you guys give them permits to be there to apply the pesticides and stuff. So I wanted to remove myself from that responsibility, knowing that okay, the department.
You can't, sorry.
You can't. The person that's applying it has got an operator certificate, which means, by definition, they're supposed to know what they're doing.
But you don't audit those. You don't audit them.
No, sorry. If you gave out the tender, you're ultimately responsible. What you can do is you can contact Stian's office because they can then come and audit. But ultimately, you're still responsible because you gave out that tender.